All right, what's up, Dragon Brood? It looks like we are on day 8 of Bloomburrow previews. I'm assuming they're going to go through the week until Thursday, and we'll get the full set on Friday. But there's a lot to cover, so let's just get right into these cards. We're going to start with Calamitous Tide. This is a 4 mana, 4 colorless blue, so 6 total mana. It's a sorcery. Return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. Draw 2 cards, then discard a card. Like, in a weird way, these cards don't generally make 60 card decks for a lot of reasons, largely because of the cost and its sorcery speed. But this does allow you to draw 2 cards. You do have to discard, but it helps you filter your hand. But this awkwardly might, and I mean a slight might, be something that shows up in the frog type decks, right? Because they want to have stuff leave the battlefield without dying and trigger some of their stuff, like we saw in yesterday's previews. So maybe 1 or 2 of these is possible. I mean, in worst case scenario, you do get to remove 2 blockers, and then maybe get to do something. So we'll see. I wouldn't put money on this being played, but I'm also not going to be surprised if I see it. Heirloom Epic. This is a 1 colorless artifact. Pay 4, tap it, draw a card. For each mana and this ability's activation cost, you may tap an untapped creature you control rather than pay that mana. Activate only as a sorcery. So this basically has Convoke for the cost. You can tap a creature to cover a mana cost in it, so you can tap 2 mana and 2 creatures. Draw a card. You can only do this as a sorcery, which is a big downside because it means you now have to leave your creatures tapped on your opponent's turn. But I guess that's the balancing part to getting to draw a card. That being said, if you're playing something with squirrels and tokens, like, maybe. I don't think we're going to play this. I think there's other ways to get cards that aren't as big of a deal, and some cards come with their own built-in recursion and stuff, so you probably don't have room for this. But it's probably a pretty sweet card in Limited. What do we have here? Mind Whisker. 2 colorless and a blue for a 3/2 rat wizard. At the beginning of your upkeep, you surveil 1. And then you have Threshold that if there are 7 or more cards in a graveyard, creatures your opponents control get -1, -0. This is kind of bordering on playable here. I mean, it's just like, it's a 3 mana 3/2, not like spectacular, but fine. You get to surveil every turn, so if you have a deck that cares about Threshold, this helps you hit Threshold faster. Obviously, in multiples, it's decent. You get the better of the cards on top of your library. Technically, there's some upside to this guy. I think there is some room for this type of card. Honored Dray Leader. Colorless, 2 colorless and a green, so you have 3 mana for a 1/1 Squirrel Warrior with Trample. When this enters, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each other squirrel and or food you control. Whenever another squirrel or food you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on Honored Dray Leader. Wow. Yeah, this card's actually definitely playable. Like, if you're playing squirrels or food, honestly, this may not even have to go into a squirrel deck. We still have all that food stuff from Eldraine, so still a possibility. But yeah, this is interesting. 3 mana, very likely when you play it going to be, I'm guessing, a 3/3, if not at least a 2/2, and quickly become a 3/3 or bigger. So yeah, probably. I mean, this has to be at least somewhat. If you're playing squirrels, for sure, this is playable. Also, I had to look up Dray. It randomly is like, I guess, the nest where squirrels live. Didn't know that had a special name. But there you go. Blacksmith's Talent. It's a 1 red class. When it enters, create a colorless equipment artifact token named Sword. Or unless you're Sean Connery, Sword. Or S-word. The equipment says equipped creature gets +1/+1 and equipped 2. So you can pay 2 to give a creature +1/+1. You can pay 3 to go to level 2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, attach target equipment you control to up to 1 target creature you control, so you get a free equip. Or you can pay 4 to go to level 3. During your turn, equipped creatures you control have double strike and haste. Like, I don't think this is that good. But we keep getting cards that are just like, hey, here's 1 more equipment. Here's 1 card that lets you search for equipment. Here's a thing that cares about equipment. Right, so we might be closer with something like this. Because you get a free equip that's fairly cheap to get to. Like, you get a free equipment out of it. So if you have something that also cares about artifacts that are in the battlefield or things that let equipment equip for free, who knows? Like, maybe there's a world where this is even better in a non-standard format. But right now, I don't think this is a card that most of us are going to want. We have Hoarders Overflow, colorless and a red for an enchantment. When Hoarders Overflow enters, and whenever you expend 4, so that's pay your 4th mana to cast a spell for the turn, you put a stash counter on it. You can pay a colorless and a red, you can sacrifice this, you discard your hand, then draw cards equal to the number of stash counters on Hoarders Overflow. Yeah, I don't think we're gonna. There's just you have to make a lot of investment and still spend mana to get the benefit out of this card. I don't think this is what we want to do most of the time. Like I like what it's trying to do of letting you refill your hand so you have stuff to cast so you can keep hitting your expend 4. But it feels like I can't. I'm just trying to picture what scenarios or what game states, especially when you're going against like squirrels and mice and other stuff right now, like when you're going to want to just play this on 2 or 3. It comes in with 1 counter on it, right? Then you maybe next turn add a counter, the next turn add a counter, probably still have a card or 2 in hand. Like, are we going to want to discard what we have to just draw 2 new cards? Like, again, in limited, I think it's fine because there'll be a lot of times that maybe you let this get to like 3 and your hand's empty and you just reload. But I don't think this is a 60 card. Feed the Cycle. Colorless and a black for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, forage or pay a black. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. That seems reasonable. Like, you can either just exile 3 cards from graveyard or pay an additional black. So it either costs you 2 black and 1 at instant speed to kill a creature or planeswalker, which basically is what, like murder or whatever at that point. Or you can just pay to exile 3 things from your graveyard. Like, this is fine removal. Nothing insane, but if you're playing the Squirrels deck that's already playing black and cares about foraging, this is probably fine. Honestly, probably even goes into the Rats deck because there's some Rats that surveil and discard cards or whatever, so probably works in that deck too. Dwar, I guess, Door Port Mage. Colorless and a blue for a 1/3 frog wizard. Whenever 1 or more other creatures you control leave the battlefield without dying, you draw a card. You can pay a colorless and a blue to tap it. Return another target creature you control to its owner's hands. Yeah, I think if you're doing the frog, bounce, flicker, whatever thing, this fits into that strategy, right? It's a 2 mana 1/3. You can block with something, then return it to your hand so you don't take any damage. You'll still get to draw an additional card. So yeah, if this deck works, this is a card you'll likely see in those. Right, we're going to have to trust the translation on this one. This is Coiling Rebirth. 3 colorless, black. Looks like a sorcery, and gift a card. So return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then if you promise the gift, so you let your opponent draw a card, that target creature is not legendary, you create a copy token of that creature, except it's a 1/1. So if you give your opponent a card, you get the creature you're targeting back into play, plus you get a 1/1 copy of it. That's fine. I mean, it's a reanimation spell. We'll probably make some type of deck with it. The thing, though, is we have a lot of good reanimator spells right now. Like, we have a blue-black, or a black-green one. I think we have 2 black-green ones, actually, that are still available. We have a 4 mana one. I think we have a 5 mana one. We have this one. We have the one that you can sacrifice artifacts or whatever and return that many from the graveyard. So, like, while this card's probably fine, I just don't know if we needed it because we already have a lot of really good options. Like, if there's something we figure out we can reanimate that's not legendary, that has some cool ability, and we just get 2 copies of it, like, that's probably pretty cool, and that's where you'll want it. But otherwise, it's just a fine reanimator spell. Builder's Talent. It's a colorless and a white, and when it enters, create an 0/4 white wall creature token with Defender. You can pay 1 to level up, and whenever 1 or more non-creature, non-land permanents you control enter, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So you get no 4 wall, and then after that, whenever... Oh, no, it says non-creature, non-land permanent. Oh, so you have to... Wow, okay, that's very specific. And then 5 to go to level 3. When this class becomes level 3, return target non-creature, non-land permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. What? I don't like this. Like, we make an 0/4 wall. That's fine for 2 mana. Next turn, we pay 1. And then if we have a non-creature, non-land permanent enter the battlefield, you get a +1/+1 counter on the target creature you control. So assuming we still have our wall, we'll get to put a counter on it. But I'm kind of thinking, like, what are we putting into play? Like some mana artifact or something, possibly. But then, like, do we care? Like, are we paying 5 to return? I'm like, what are we even returning? Like, yeah, I don't. This card's probably much better than I'm giving it credit for, but right now I'm just not seeing it. All right, back to the translators. This is a Tangle Roller. It's a 3 colorless 6/6 artifact vehicle. You can pay 3 and tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. You can tap 2 untapped tokens you control, and it becomes a creature until end of turn. This is interesting. 3 mana 6/6. You can pay 3 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on something. So it's still 6 mana, but like you can tap 2 untapped tokens, which could be any type of tokens. Could be creature tokens, could be food. You know, maybe the Squirrel's Attack wants this if you're generating enough food. This is just like tap 2 food, attack for 6, or have a blocker. Like survives a sweeper, even just sits on the battlefield. Then you can just use your food to keep attacking. Like, I could see some uses for this. This, like, it's really weird, but it does have multiple upsides. And like, if you don't ever want to put it at risk, you just put counters on stuff. It's like, yeah, I feel this a little bit. This looks like this is just the name of this creature. It's just Lanza Teteris. 3 colorless and a red for a 3/4. Looks like some type of raccoon. It has menace. Whenever you expend 4, you deal 2 damage to each opponent. Oh, so see, now this is kind of interesting, because if your goal is to do the expend 4 thing, you get 2 damage now every time you hit 4 mana spent. It's only a 3/4 for 4 mana, which isn't great, but it does also have menace. So it could account potentially for like 5 mana a turn, right? You attack for 3, they have trouble blocking, you can deal 2 damage. It is only damage to opponents, so that's a thing. But it is also damage to each opponent if you wanted to play something like this in Commander, so that's cool. So, like, there might be a little bit of room for this to find a home. I wouldn't imagine you'd play 4, but maybe 2. Banishing Light. We've seen this before. 2 colorless and a white. Enters, you exile a permanent an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. Nothing really to write home about, just quality if you're playing something that cares about permanents and enchantments. Rabbit Response, love the name. 2 colorless, white, instant. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. If you control a rabbit, you scry 2. Okay, this isn't that exciting. A good limited combat trick, though, I will say that. But if you do have a way to just make a bunch of rabbits really fast, this is kind of cool. But yeah, in limited, you take this, you play it. It's a reasonable card. You can even play it in a non-rabbit deck. You can play it like birds or something if you want to. Kind of cool, but nothing real exciting. Probably wouldn't make the cut in most 60-card decks. Nightwhirl Hermit. 2 colorless and a blue for a rat rogue. 1/4 with vigilance. And as long as there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, Nightwhirl Hermit gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked. This is probably fine and limited. I don't know how much we want to set up a 3 mana 1/4 that potentially just gets to attack for 2 unblocked every turn. Like, it's not bad. It's a good filler. There's a world where we might play it, but I think you want other enablers that are going to be surveilling, drawing cards, whatever, more than you're going to want a 1/4. Nocturnal Hunger, 2 colorless and a black for an instant. You can gift a food, destroy target creature. If the gift wasn't promised, you lose 2 life. So this is 2 colorless and a black, just destroy anything at instant speed if you give them a food. If you don't give them a food, then you lose 2 life. Like, that's fine. I think we have other better removal you're going to play in 60 card, but for limited, this is a totally reasonable removal card. Agate Assault, 2 colorless and a red. It's a sorcery. Choose 1. Deals 4 damage to target creature. If that creature would die, you exile it instead. Or you can just exile an artifact. I mean, again, this feels like an okay limited card. I feel like we have other things to deal damage to creatures, to exile artifacts, or destroy artifacts, if we really want them, that are instant speed and cost less. Whisker Quill Scribe, a colorless and a red for a 2/2 mouse citizen. The Valiant ability is whenever It's targeted with a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn. You can discard a card. If you do, draw a card. I don't hate this if we get to builds of the mice deck that feel like you're running low on cards or something and you just need to filter your hand or something. If so, this feels like this could work in those decks, but otherwise I think you have better 2-mana things you can play. Baker's Bane Duo. Colorless and a green for a 2/2 squirrel raccoon. Like, Baker's Bane Duo, and it's a raccoon and a squirrel trying to steal a pie from the window. That is hilarious. Anyway, this 2/2 squirrel raccoon enters the battlefield. It creates a food token, and when you expend 4, this gets +1/+1 till end of turn. Not great for the the raccoon's portion is pretty bad. If it got a +1/+1 every time you hit 4 mana, I think I could be into it. Just +1/+1 till end of turn just really isn't a big deal. But if you're playing some squirrel deck that cares about food, then being able to have a 2/2 and make a food token and set up something cool on turn 3 could be worth it. So possibly worth considering if you're in a food-heavy deck or a deck that needs a lot of tokens potentially. But I don't think the raccoon part of this matters that much. Keen-Eyed Curator. Green for a 3/3 raccoon scout, which means this has to have a downside, very likely. As long as there are 4 or more card types among cards exiled with Keen-Eyed Curator, it gets +4/+4 and trample. Exile a target card from a graveyard. Okay, I was wrong. 0 downside on this card. This card, what even is this card? Like, it's a 2-mana 3/3. Just straight up, it's a 2-mana 3/3. Let's just stop there. It's a 2-mana 3/3, no downside, right? So you already have the bigger creature on turn 2, even if you're on the draw. And then you can just start spending cards, or spending mana to exile stuff from graveyards. So late game, you just remove a land, an instant, a creature, and whatever else, right? That's in the graveyard. And then this is a 7/7 and tramples. Like, bro, this has to be playable. Like, even in just like mono green aggro stuff, this is a reasonable card. But in raccoons, this is also a quality card, right? Because I was also thinking about most of the raccoon stuff you want is like 4 or 5 mana or whatever, so you're spending that 4. But yeah, this ain't a bad option to have. Like, this card's actually solid. Sticky Tongue Sentinel, 2 colorless and a green. It's a frog warrior. It's the 3/3 with reach. When it enters, return up to 1 other target permanent you control to its owner's hand. Yeah, this is a common that probably does make the cut in the frog decks, right? It's a 3/3 with reach, so solid. You do have to return something else. It does say target permanent, so you could return a land if you wanted to. It doesn't say non-land permanent, but you could play something early on turn 1 or turn 2, maybe something that, you know, makes a token or whatever, and then you just bounce this, and then you can reuse that ability the following turn. But yeah, this is reasonable. It's nothing like super crazy, but it's 3/3 with potential upside in the frog deck. 3-Tree Mascot. It's 2 colorless. It's a shapeshifter. It's a 2/1 artifact creature. It has every creature type. You can pay 1, add a mana of any color, activate only once each turn. Yeah, this is strictly a limited card. I don't think we're really looking for this anywhere else. Scavenger's Talent. 1 black. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control die, create a food token. This ability triggers only once each turn. You can pay a colorless and a black to level 2. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target player mills 2 cards. Then you can pay 3 to go to level 3. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice 3 other non-land permanents. If you do, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. I like this card a lot. If you're playing the squirrels deck, particularly, which is probably why there's a squirrel in the artwork telling you where this goes, when 1 or more creatures you control die, you make a food, right? So if they just kill your stuff, you're getting a food token. We know the squirrels want food for a lot of different things. Or if you have something that just wants tokens and or food, you can also play this. Doesn't have to be squirrels. And then when you sacrifice a permanent, your opponent mills 2 cards. Actually, it says target player mills 2 cards. So you could actually sacrifice a food, gain 3 life, mill yourself, so you're also able to forage with all those other squirrel cards that care about you foraging. So this is almost like a 1-card engine that takes care of itself. This also doesn't say your opponent has to kill your creature. So if you have something that lets you like sacrifice a squirrel token to do a thing, then you also generate a food, then you can sack that food to gain 3 life, then you mill yourself for 2 cards. So you can kind of keep your own little plan going. And then at the beginning of your end step, you can sacrifice 3 other non-land permanents, so if you've saved up those food, and then return stuff from your graveyard. So, yeah, all parts of this are actually really good, and it kind of takes care of itself, or fuels itself, through each of the turns you level up. So this is actually kind of a cool card. Starforged Sword. This is 4 colorless. It's an equipment. I love that the bird's trying to pick up the sword in this. It's kind of hilarious. It has a gift tapped fish. When it enters, if the gift was promised, you get to attach the sword to a creature you control. Equipped creature gets +3/+3 and loses flying. Okay, well that makes sense. The bird can't carry the big stone sword. You can pay 3 to equip. So you basically just give something 3/3 and it can't have flying. Or you could pay 4 to just put it onto a thing and your opponent gets a 1/1 fish. If I'm playing limited and I just need equipment to fuel the equipment matter stuff, then sure, but I'm not really sure I want this otherwise. Starscape Cleric, colorless and a black for a 2/1 bat cleric. It has an offspring of 3, so 2 colorless and a black. The card has flying, it can't be blocked, and whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. It is a 2/1 flyer for 2. The deck does care about you gaining life. If you get 2 of them, then your opponent's losing 2 life every time you gain life. Like, this is probably playable. Like, there's a spot for this for sure. We just got to figure out what it is. Give, or Give, but I'm assuming it's Give. Scaled Scorch, a black and a red for a 3/2 legendary lizard mercenary. It has ward of pay 2 life. Like, that's a perfect ward. Before I get to the rest of the card, that's a perfect ward for these lizards because even if your opponent kills this, they've now lost life for the turn, which fuels some of your other lizard stuff. But other creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on them for each opponent who lost life this turn. When you cast a lizard spell, this card deals 1 damage to target opponent. So effectively, if this is on the battlefield, you cast a lizard, your opponent's lost a life, your creature comes into play. Since your opponent's lost life, it comes in with the +1/+1. So it takes care of itself. You don't even need other cards to have your opponent lose life. Yeah, this card's definitely playable. There's a bunch of lizards that care about your opponent's losing life during the turn. This is perfect. So yeah, like for 2 mana, honestly, this card's kind of baller. I mean, it's a 2 mana 3/2. It has a decent ward on it. It can grow your team. It can deal damage to your opponent. Like, there's a lot happening here for 2 mana. This card's really good. Festival of Embers, 4 colorless and a red. It's an enchantment. During your turn, you may cast instant or sorcery spells from your graveyard by paying 1 life in addition to their other cost. If a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Pay a red and a colorless, you can sacrifice Festival of Embers. This is a strange card. Okay, so during your turn, you can cast instant and sorcery spells from your graveyard by paying 1 life in addition to their other costs. Now, this does cost 5 on top of it, so like it's not like it's the most efficient thing, but as a late game card, maybe this is fine, right? Something like Otters or whatever, you've done all you're going to do with, maybe you've got 6 or 7 spells in your graveyard. You set this up on the following turn, you get to just go off, right? If a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So this way, if you're playing stuff out of your graveyard, when they resolve, they just go away. That makes sense. The last part, though, is pay a colorless and a red, sacrifice Festival of Embers. I guess that's just here, so like after you've emptied the spells you're trying to empty from your graveyard, you can get rid of this, and then now you can just start rebuilding your graveyard, I suppose? Yeah, I don't know. This card's kind of odd. I like it, but it might be costed just at the number that makes it where you don't play it. Quick note, I just had to scroll past a bunch of stuff that looked like they were commander cards, so don't know if y'all want me to also do a follow-up video at the end after all the cards are previewed of just the commander stuff. Let me know in the comments, but otherwise, we're going to continue with what's in the actual base set for this set. So we have Portent of Calamity. It's an X and a blue. For sorcery, you reveal the top X cards of your library. For each card type, you may exile a card of that type from among them, put the rest in your graveyard. You may cast a spell from among the exiled cards without paying their mana cost, If you exiled 4 or more cards this way, then put the rest of the exiled cards into your hand. Wow, so this card's a little bit of a gamble, right? Because first off, you need to have for sure 4 different types of cards in your deck, which generally you're going to, right? You're going to have at least land, instant, sorcery, probably planeswalker or creature, right? So you're going to at least check a few of the boxes. So you reveal the top X cards, and then for each card you have to exile up to 1 type. But if you don't exile at least 4 of a type, you don't really get a benefit from this, the way I'm reading it, right? You put the rest in your graveyard, then you can cast one from among what you exiled without paying the cost. So you get one of those for free, and then the rest go into your hand. So if nothing else, you at least just get to draw those cards, right? If you don't get a free one, you're at least filling your hand with however big X is. So, well, actually, not even that. You're filling your hand with that many different types that you exiled. So in the event, you only get to exile. Let's say you look at 6, so you pay 7 total mana. You look at 3 different card types. That's not enough to meet the requirement that you get a free one, so those 3 just go into your hand. If you remove 4 or 5 or more card types, then you get to play one of those for free and the others go into your hand. I don't know about this card, man. I don't think the traditional decks that are playing control stuff want this. I think we have better things to get certain cards we want or to just draw more cards. So I think there are other options there. Also, this might be a thing. I'm just kind of like thinking out loud here, but maybe otters want 1 or 2 of these, right? Like you have a turn where your hand's not that strong to finish the opponent. Maybe you spend like 3 or 4 mana and you just get to put some cards in your hand to load up for next turn, right? Like that's reasonable. And you get the 1 trigger off of playing this gets a sorcery. So like maybe something like that you can play 2 of in that deck possibly. Like again, this feels like one that's probably better than I'm giving it credit for, but I just feel like we have better ways to search the top X of our library than playing this. Eluge, Shoreless Seas. It's a colorless, blue. So 4 mana for a legendary elemental fish that has star, where its power and toughness are equal to the number of islands you control. When it enters or attacks, you put a flood counter on target land, and that land's an island in addition to its other types for as long as it has a flood counter on it. The first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn costs 1 blue or a colorless less to cast for each land you control with a flood counter on it. Oh, there's a lot happening here. So let's say you have only islands, right, when you cast it. So it's a 4 mana 4/4, which is fine. But then you get to put a flood counter on something. So now your first instant or sorcery spell each turn will cost 1 less. Then if it attacks, possibly as a 5/5, because you played a land the next turn, you get to put a flood counter on something else, and now your first spell each turn costs 2 less. This feels playable. Almost like a somewhat of a creature version of the artifact we have that like you can put a counter on every turn, and then your instants and sorceries all cost less. Like kind of like that, but it's very weird. I will say this too though, the island or the whatever we're calling the flood tokens counters don't leave the cards when this dies. So if you play one later, it already comes in with to get the benefit of the flood tokens being out. So there is that. But yeah, I don't know. This feels like it's playable. I'm just not sure what wants it. Maybe since actually no, I was about to say that the Haughty decks are going to be losing the serpents, but I don't think they actually are losing the serpents. So yeah, I'm not sure where this might be a card that doesn't get played right now and ends up getting played like a year from now with the next rotation. Blooming Burst. Colorless and a red for an instant. You could gift a treasure to your opponent. Blooming Blast. Why did I say that? Like, oh, well, Blooming Blast is the name of this card. What am I doing? Anyway, colorless and a red for an instant. You can gift a treasure to your opponent. Blooming Blast deals 2 damage to target creature. If the gift was promised, Blooming Blast also deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. Wow. This is playable. The concern, though, is what's the risk of giving your opponent one more mana? Like, one extra mana can be really powerful at the wrong stage of the game. But if you're playing something like Otters as an example, like, you just want more spells, right? And you probably don't care that much about your opponent having another mana at the right stage, especially if you're giving prowess to everything, and you're dealing 3 damage to the opponent, and you're getting rid of a creature. Like, probably okay. It doesn't deal damage to planeswalkers, it only deals damage to creatures, so that's something to note. But I would say this is fringe playable at least. Right, we have Fountain Ports. This is a land, it's a rare, tap it for colorless. You can pay 2 and tap it, sacrifice a token, draw a card. You can pay 3 and tap it, pay 1 life, create a blue fish token. You can pay 4 and tap it, create a treasure token. Yeah, this card's good. This card's good. Sacrificing a token and draw a card is pretty cool. There's a few different deck types right now, and based on the set, they're going to want tokens. So that's actually pretty awesome. Or if you're just playing a any tokens deck, right, and you just want a way to draw cards. You can also make more tokens. So if you have a deck that cares about tokens or more permanents or something entering the battlefield, like this triggers that. And then, of course, just paying 4 to generate treasure. Like, that's fine too. Like, every part of this is at least useful. I think creating the treasure's probably the least useful, but still not worthless on this card. Because if nothing else, it creates a token, and then you can sacrifice a token on the next turn and draw a card. So yeah, really cool. Really, really cool. Bellowing Crier, a colorless and a blue for a Frog Advisor. It's a 2/1. When it enters, draw a card and discard a card. This is fine. I would only play this if there aren't other quality 2-drops for frogs. Otherwise, you're probably not looking at this card. Milania's Pathmaker. 3 colorless and a red for an Otter Wizard that's a 4/2. And when it enters, exile the top card of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. Yeah, this is just limited specifically. We're not playing that in Constructed. Druid of the Spade. 2 colorless and a green for a 2/3 Rabbit Druid. As long as you control a token, Druid of the Spade gets +2/+0 and has trample. So if you're playing rabbit tokens, this is a 4/3 with trample for 3. Maybe there's a world, depending on what the rest of the deck looks like when you're playing rabbits, like, I could be talked into this card. I wouldn't probably start there as my 3 mana creature of choice, but if you can relatively guarantee you have tokens, this isn't bad. Treeguard Duo, 3 colorless and a green for a 3/4 Frog Rabbit. When this enters, until end of turn, target creature you control gets vigilance and gets XX, where X is equal to the number of creatures you control. If that creature got trample in XX, maybe. But otherwise, this feels just like a quality limited card more than anything else. Eddie Merc Crab, 5 colorless, blue for a 5/5 elemental crab. This card does have flash. It costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. And it enters tapped if it's not your turn. And when it enters, tap up to 2 target creatures. If you're playing a spells matter deck and you just want something larger to finish the game with, like just a straight up creature, like this is 5/5 for probably like 3 mana a lot of the time, the earliest you can cast this. So like that's fine. You know, like you could probably make that work. It's flash, you can play it during the opponent's end step. It does tap down 2 creatures, so you can punch through easier the following turn. I don't think a lot of decks are going to lean on this type of card, but it is one that, again, that if it were to show up, I wouldn't think it was crazy. Wow, I didn't realize how many cards there were today, so there's a lot. Obviously, a lot of stuff starting to come together in this set. I want to remind everybody, I will be linking my playlist if you want a bunch of rotation-ready stuff so you can still build and play right now without wasting wild cards. Like, that list of decks will be up. And if you just want to catch other previews, there's been a lot of crazy stuff, so if you want to get some quick feedback on those, I'm going to link another preview video here. But that's all of you for now. We'll see you next time.